And Lori Woolever, who was his assistant at the time, who's now writing her own books, reaches out to me a few days before the interview was scheduled and says, Tony needs to watch Chef. They're sending a screener over to 0.0. That's the company that produced all his television shows. And he's going to watch it in the screening room here. He thought maybe you'd like to join him.
Nice. And
then you guys can have lunch in this neighborhood. So I went over there. And it was me and Tony and their social media person, the three of us watching Chef. I mean, that was, I hate to sound like a fanboy, but that was a big deal for me.
100%.
And he was just, that was the only time I spent time with him one-on-one.
Okay.
But he had that? Yes. Did he have that swagger and that thing you saw on television? Yes. But he was also, I think, a sincerely humble person. And I think he was a force for good.
Have you decided what you're going to get?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're going to get one of each.
One of each. Got it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of One of Each. And today I have Andrew Friedman with me. Andrew, in this show, we mostly have chefs, people who are part of the industry, restaurant owners, mixologists, and everything. But once in a while, I have conversations with people who are part of the industry or have that connection with food, with the food world, but that are not necessarily inside. And we were talking before that we love our role, that maybe we are at the other side of the counter or the table, enjoying food. But Andrew, welcome to One of Each.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be. We've been talking about this since last Labor Day.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I'm very happy we're finally in the same place again.
Yeah. And just to give you some background to those who don't know Andrew, Andrew and I, we've met through common friends in the food world for some years now. But Andrew, besides being a writer, a great communicator, he has a podcast called Andrew Talks to Chef, and that's been running for how many years now?
Now 7.5.
Wow. So I'm very humble and grateful for you to taking the time to be with me. And, we just started doing One of Each last summer, and we have a long way to go. So for me, it's an inspiration and an honor to have you here. I
mean, thank you. That's nice of you to say. I think it's just a function of me being older than you. So by the time you get to my age, I'm sure, have done as many episodes.
Yeah. And this is also another milestone on One of Each because it's the first episode that we record outside of our Miami studio. So today, Andrew, thanks for opening your house, your home to me. We are here in Brooklyn. It's freezing outside, not like in Miami. So again, this is a very special episode for so many reasons. So thanks for...
It's nice of you to say. I'm very happy to be doing this.
So I always start these conversations by asking my guests how they got into the food world, whether they are chefs or restaurant owners or mixologists or just people who are passionate. Like, I don't know, we've had DJs, watch dealers and everything, but we all have in common that connection with the food world that usually starts at an early stage. So what was your first connection with that world, and what drove you to do what you do today?
So it's funny because, I've guested I'm on your show. We just before this recorded an interview with you on my show, which is airing the same week. And, we talked in that interview about your growing up eating Lebanese food in Venezuela and the food culture. And, it was always there for you. I was the total opposite of you. I grew up, I had a single working mom. Very understandably, she was exhausted when she got home. As often as not, we ate like McDonald's or Wendy's for dinner. She was often in bed by 8:30. Time at the table was a foreign notion to me. I always enjoyed, although I never thought about going into it or covering it or anything like that. I always enjoyed a good restaurant. I didn't know food, but a place that had real hospitality, that had a real personality. And I was trying to be a screenwriter. Mm-hmm. I was working for 2 film producers. And at one
that was in New York.
In New York.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. I grew up in Miami. Moved to New York, went to college. I was an English major. Always had wanted to be in the movie business. I got in. I met a lot of people, which was good. It didn't happen, but I tried to sell my scripts. But I had no time to write. So I left that job and I got a job. I just answered an ad and I got a job with a company, which at the time, they've not existed for years. Probably nobody listening to this will know them, but it was the top restaurant PR firm in New York City.
Okay.
It was called Kratz and Company. The principal there was a guy named David Kratz.
Still exists?
The company is long gone.
Okay.
David, it's a whole other story. He ended up in the art world where he ended up running the New York Academy of Art.
Wow.
But at the time it was the top restaurant PR firm in New York. And I got handed clients like the Gotham Bar and Grill when it was still Alfred Portali. Wow. We were signed to represent Aquavit when a 24-year-old named Marcus Samuelson became the chef.
Wow.
Excuse me. There was a restaurant called Union Pacific, which is where a guy named Rocco DiSpirito got famous.
Wow.
Rocco was a client.
That was what years, more or less?
That was 93 to 98 for me. Okay. People are probably making the math now. Yeah, well, I usually try not to give out years because, I'm trying to maintain my youthful reputation. But so sorry. I very quickly, although I was still going home at night and writing screenplays, I got really into the food world, the restaurant world specifically. And I'm really sorry, Nadal.
No.
Will they edit?
Yeah.
I don't know. All of a sudden. But I got really into the food world, the restaurant world. And one of my clients, Alfred Portali, had never done a cookbook. He had been at the Gotham Bar and Grill for over a decade at that point. He was one of the top chefs in the United States.
Okay. We
had a wonderful rapport. And I ended up writing the Gotham Bar and Grill cookbook, which I thought would just be kind of a one-time thing, and that book ended up doing extremely well. We were nominated for awards. We won one of the big awards. And I had this realization of, this is not the kind of writer I ever thought I wanted to be, but maybe this is a way to at least not put on a suit and tie.
Okay.
And go to a PR firm every day. And I was a VP there. So I had a team of 8 people. In addition to restaurant clients, I had big corporate clients like Starbucks Coffee was my big client. Remy Martin Cognac.
Okay.
The Macallan Whiskey. These were my clients. I could have been a partner there at some point if I wanted to. And then the Gotham book did so well that I took it as an opportunity to get out, and I started looking for other projects. Mm-hmm. And that was, since you outed me on my age, that was what? That was 27 years ago.
Okay.
And I ended up collaborating on close to 30 chef cookbooks and memoirs.
Wow.
And somewhere in there, I realized that I'd accidentally become sort of an expert in the chef world.
Okay.
And that was the revelation that spun my life and my career, because I stopped working on as many cookbooks. Mm-hmm. And I still collaborate, but I collaborate more on memoirs now. But I started writing my own books, and as opposed to being food focused, They were chef focused.
We're going to talk later about that specific book that I love.
Which one is that?
Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll.
Oh, thank you. But like, yeah, I had a couple of epiphanies, like in the mid to late 2000s. Like, so my first book was about the Bocuse d'Or, and I tracked the American team. And as I was interviewing these people, I realized I had just accumulated a lot of knowledge and understanding of the chef world and kitchen life and what the progression of a chef's career is. And that's kind of been the basis of what I do for, since then.
But did you see it as it was definitely a career path, but today, and I hate the word, like being a foodie, like everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people love food. A lot of people have that passion of going to restaurants, meeting chefs, traveling to collect Michelin stars and everything. Did you see that connection to the restaurant world with the chef world at the time? It was just your work, or you felt like, okay, this is my life, this is my passion, and like you had a real connection with that world that today, again, it's very common to see people who call themselves foodies and everything. But at the time, there's no social media. There wasn't all those communication tools that we have today that make people appreciate that food world. How was that connection in your personal case?
When I was around it, it was a very exciting time. We still, the whole American food revolution, chef revolution, that happened. It started arguably in the very late 60s, slowly percolated through the 70s, and then really exploded in the 80s. So there was still the kind of halo of that time period, although I didn't get to experience it. Okay. I was around for it. I was in New York for college, but I was oblivious. I didn't know any chefs' names. I didn't know what the hot restaurants were. I remember driving in a taxi once by a restaurant called Jams on 79th Street. I'm like, what kind of name is that? Well, was Jonathan Waxman's first New York restaurant. Wow. That was a big deal. It was probably the hottest restaurant of that year. I didn't know. I had no idea. No clue. But honestly, for me, I loved still a great restaurant. If I'm really honest, there's a vain part of me that loved that I started to know people in the dining rooms. I loved that. I loved it. That first happened to me it's kind of a funny story, but it's a digression. But that happened to me once in college at a place I used to go to a lot. And the first time they remembered me, I just thought that was the coolest thing. I was like, that is so awesome for a restaurant to know who you are.
Oh, nice.
But the other thing for me, if I'm honest, is, and I would not describe myself as cool, but I'm a much cooler person now than I was even in my 20s and 30s. And, that whole thing of like the chef swagger and like the whole opposites attract thing.
Yeah.
There was an element of that. I'm a straight guy. Most of the chefs I knew were men.
Yeah.
But there, if anyone's ever seen the old television show Happy Days, and wondered how in the world a guy like Richie Cunningham could hang out with Fonzie, I'm living proof that actually happens. I was like the Richie Cunningham of that community. I look back sometimes and I'm like, I can't believe these people let me go out after service with them. And,
nice.
I felt very welcomed into the whole world for whatever reason.
Yeah. And now I think these days it's, I don't know if you call it an asset or what, but again, today the food world attracts much more people in terms of people wanting to own restaurants without knowing all the trouble they're getting into. Kids wanting to be chefs with so many role models of successful chefs. Every other person thinks they are like a food writer or reviewer, whether if it's on Instagram or TikTok or whatever. But you were genuinely part of that word and you built strong and true connections before everybody wanted to be friends with a chef?
Yes, although that is true, but there was a kind of a generation before me of people, like Ruth Reichel had been writing about these people since like the 70s, I mean, there was a generation of people who were like those people like Coleman Andrews and Ruth, like there was like no church and state thing back then. Like I often say that in different mediums, that one demarcation line of something really changing is when people start to have gatekeepers. So, I know one tennis writer who years ago went down to a tournament in Florida and he shared a condo with Jimmy Connors.
Wow.
While Connors was in the tournament, right? And, there's old sports writers who talk about going down to Florida during spring break and staying in the same motel, not a nice hotel, a motel with the players. And at the end of the day, hanging out at the pool and getting their interviews, but that's over now, right? Because then people have managers and agents and they're getting paid more. And in the chef world, and I was one of those gatekeepers. Like at the time I was in it, these people, yes, their popularity was going up, but they were also starting to have, there were starting to be people between them and everyone else. Okay. Right. But I kind of snuck in right before that became, like omnipresent.
Okay.
So, I actually had this talk once with Ruth Reichel about how jealous I was. And, I said, I have it really good, but no one has the access that she had. Like, and nobody will.
And I think it's important, and people sense that when those connections are genuine. For example, people all the time ask me like, oh, how did you become such a good friend with, I don't know, Massimo Bottura or Alex Atala or you name them, no? And they say, I don't know. It just happened. I don't remember who introduced us. I don't remember how many times we spent, how many days we spent together at their restaurants or I've been hosting them in wherever I've lived. It just happens naturally. And I think that's a beauty of those relationships, that they are genuine, no?
I think so, but I think if I can compliment both of us, this will sound like a terrible cliche, but I think it's very true. Chefs are very instinctual creatures.
Yeah.
And you, and I would say this of myself proudly, it's kind of an outdated term, but I think we're both gentlemen.
Exactly.
And we treat people well.
100%.
We tell the truth. We don't bait and switch people. We don't promise things we're not going to do.
Yeah.
We come to these relationships and other professional relationships not looking to embarrass anyone or cause harm. And I think chefs can sense that. I'm amazed at the number of times I've been interviewing someone I've never met before, a chef. And sometimes people who aren't really all that innately social. And I'll at some point say like, hey, if it's okay, can I ask? And they'll say some version of, you can ask me anything you want.
Okay.
Right.
Nice.
But it's just based on the hour we've spent together. And I think they can smell whether or not you have good intent. I don't mean that you're going to be like as a journalist, I don't mean that I'm going to act like their publicist. Yeah. I just mean I'm going to be fair, that I'm not looking, and everyone knows who these outlets are. I don't need to name them, but I'm not a writer for X website that is looking to take a quote out of context or that is looking for the chef to slip up.
100%.
And first of all, I don't see the value in that. I think this is one area where I do sort of get annoyed at younger journalists in this realm. I always say we're not covering nuclear proliferation.
Yeah.
If a young chef doing one of the first 5 interviews they've ever given says something they shouldn't have said, I will tell them. And I have friends who are like, you shouldn't do that. You should that, you could get a lot of play off of that. But I will tell them, listen, I'm not going to use that quote and you shouldn't say that to anybody.
100%.
Right. But that's rare.
Yeah.
That's rare. And they never forget it.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that they value is we're not just there like to collect selfies or things like that. And I have very good friends, like super famous chefs, and I don't think I have a picture with them. I think that comes naturally. But I wanted to go back. You talked about Ruth Rachel, which I admire. I think she's great. And I loved your interview with her when she talked about her book, Paris Story, I think.
Paris, a novel.
The Paris novel.
Yeah, that was this year or last year.
That was beautiful. And I really loved that episode because I have a friend who was going through like a health problem at the time at home. Thank God she's great now. But she's French. She loves food. So I bought that book and sent her her the book as a gift because she was spending time at home. Like, you might as well read this book, and she was super happy with it.
It's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Ruth that I so admire, I mean, in addition to the fact that, for me, there's a handful of people who made my career possible, that kind of created a marketplace for the kind of stuff I write about. Mm-hmm. Ruth is one. Gail Green, the late New York Magazine critic, is one. Coleman Andrews is one. Tony Bourdain, for sure. For me personally, as someone who calls himself a chef writer, not a food writer, I mean, Tony was the one. He was the one that, honestly, Kitchen Confidential, I mean, that's when I could sort of see a future for myself.
Okay.
Because I wrote cookbooks with people. I helped them. That was the opportunity that presented itself. But I've never done one on my own. I don't love writing recipes. Like that was a job.
Okay.
A job where I made a lot of great friends and did good work, but that was not my life's work.
Okay. Did you meet Tony Bourdain in New York in person?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think most people in the industry probably did at some point. He was a very accessible person.
Okay.
No, Tony was amazing to me. He, when I had my old blog, Tokeland, and I didn't ask him to do this. I didn't know him that well. We never hung out, but he would tweet out my articles. Like, he was following my work.
Nice.
He knew his power.
Yeah.
He knew that when he tweeted out someone's work that it was going to help them.
Nice.
This is when Twitter was like it. There was no Instagram, and Tony was incredibly generous that way. He had a story in a book that I co-edited, so I did get to do some public appearances with him and some other chefs whose stories were in that book. And he was very nice. And when I was writing Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, he gave me like a 2-hour sit-down interview. We did it over lunch at the Breslin when the Breslin was still in New York.
Wow.
Really quick, because this is what a nice guy he was. The movie Chef was going to come out, the Jon Favreau movie. And Lori Woolever, who was his assistant at the time, who's now writing her own books, reaches out to me a few days before the interview was scheduled and says, Tony needs to watch Chef. They're sending a screener over to 0.0. And that's the company that produced all his television shows. And he's going to watch it in the screening room here. He thought maybe you'd like to join him.
Nice.
And then you guys can have lunch in this neighborhood. So I went over there, and it was me and Tony and their social media person, the three of us watching Chef. I mean, that was, I hate to sound like a fanboy, but that was a big deal for me.
100%.
And he was just, that was the only time I spent time with him one-on-one.
Okay.
But did he had that? Yes. Did he have that swagger and that thing you saw on television? Yes. But he was also, I think, a sincerely humble person. And I think he was a force for good. I think he was willing to call out jerks. I miss that him, I miss him being out there.
Yeah.
Because I always felt like if something ever went really bad, even though I barely knew him, like if someone got me in their crosshairs, and was coming for me, I always felt like, Tony would swoop in and tell them to, can I swear here?
Yeah.
I felt 100%. Like he would swoop in and tell them to fuck off, on social media.
Yeah.
He did that kind of thing all the time. If he saw someone being a jerk, he did that. And, he had the power and the clout to do that he was untouchable.
100%. Yeah. I don't know if I've shared this before publicly, but I have so much to thank Tony. Like I'm doing what I'm doing today because I started writing about food and travel. And I started writing about food and travel because of him. So it's very personal. And I had...
Did you ever get to meet him?
Yes. I met him once. I was going to share that. And it's like a amazing and sad story. We were in Miami. And it was during the Food and Wine Festival, South Beach Food and Wine Festival. I was there with Massimo Bottura, two of his sous chef, Francesco and Davide, I think. And we were at the Faena having lunch. And he was sitting at the bar by himself. And of course, if I go to him like, hey, Tony, he would probably like, fuck off. Well, maybe not. I don't know.
I don't think so.
But Massimo was her. So I was having lunch with Massimo and his chefs, and Massimo went to him like, hey, I mean, they hugged, they said hi. And Tony came and sat with us for lunch. It was like a 2-hour or 3-hour lunch. I was lucky enough. He was sitting to my right, like we were in the corner. He was in the head of the table. I was next to him. And we talked so much about how much he loves Lebanon, which is where I'm originally from.
Yeah.
How he wasn't able to go to do Venezuela because his insurance company wouldn't cover him or equipment or anything. So he had that task pending of doing Venezuela. And we spoke like how I would love to host him and get to like show him Venezuela. It was a beautiful conversation. And we say, okay, let's stay in touch. Let's, I don't remember if we exchanged numbers or social media, whatever. So let's stay in touch and see what happened. We finished lunch. Just as I said before, I didn't like, I said, okay, this is a very special moment. We are like on the same page. I don't want to ruin it by, can I take a picture with you? So I didn't do that, but I ended up, because we were like walking around the Faena, and I ended up taking a picture of him with Massimo. Like nice. they were like, oh, take a picture of us. So I have that picture with me. I think we have a picture all together on the table, but I don't have that picture with him.
Yeah.
And I said, it doesn't matter because we're going to meet again. We're going to go to Venezuela. We're going to do this and that. And then happened what happened. That was a very sad moment for me. But yeah, that's
the world. That was so crazy.
Yeah.
I remember, I mean, it was almost like hearing a president had been assassinated.
Yes.
I was sitting in my rec room. This is when we still lived in the suburbs. And, all of a sudden my texts, like everybody I knew. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, I know that we all know that you never know who's suffering.
Yes.
I don't think I will ever be more shocked in my life by hearing a suicide. He just seemed to have the whole world.
100%. Perfect job, perfect life.
He just seemed to have it all figured out, everything you could possibly want, you know, and it was shocking.
Yeah.
It was shocking. And he always seemed happy.
Yeah. At the moment, actually, he was super excited. He was dating already Asia Henton. He told me like how much he was spending time in Italy and how much he loved Italy and everything. So yeah, it was very, very sad. But anyway, let's go back to our conversations.
What a great, I mean, honestly, I mean, if you want, just go Google the words, listeners, go Google, Forward by Anthony Bourdain, the number of writers that he did. He always said yes. He always said yes.
Nice.
You know, just amazing.
Great. And we talked before, sorry, about the Chefs, Drugs, and Rock and Roll book, which is amazing because I think it tells the story of how all this crazy thing started in the US. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing that book, the interviews, the connection? Even the cover is like these like four guys, like super rock, like the Rolling Stones of the kitchens. Can you tell us a little bit about how was that process of writing the book?
Sure. I'll try to be quick. If I'm taking too long, you'll tell me. Don't be mad at Nadal if he tells me to go fast, everybody, because I spent 5 years writing that book, and I probably spent 4 or 5 years thinking about what I wanted it to be before I sold the project to a publisher. Oh. So that book, as you very kindly said, tells the story of basically the evolution of this creature called the American chef. Mm-hmm. I'll just generically say that there kind of wasn't such a thing before the late 60s, early 70s. And even then, barely. If you were in a kitchen professionally, you had probably made a wrong turn somewhere in your life, or perhaps you came from a family that was in the industry, but it was not a desirable profession. And as I said a few minutes ago, I started to kind of be around it as a PR person and then a collaborator on books in the 90s. And I totally missed what came before that. But I would often so all the people I was working with were people who came up in the 80s.
Okay.
And, we would work on their books and then we would go out to dinner. And I was constantly, and I would also, chef cookbooks almost always start with a little biographical section up front, which I was ghosting as well. So I was interviewing people about how they started. I was hearing all these things about this going overseas to do what they called a stage. I never heard that word, a stage, which is like an unpaid time in a kitchen to learn, to do a stage in France. And you had to go to France if you really wanted to learn. And I was hearing all these stories about going to the Culinary Institute, and I was hearing how people's parents flipped out when they told them they wanted to be cooks. And I was hearing about their first jobs in kitchens and how everybody was screaming and throwing pots and pans. And I was hearing about all the drugs and all the alcohol. And drugs were still very much around, and so was alcohol in the 90s. But I really felt like I had just missed this golden time, this really romantic, pure time when people were getting into cooking just for the sheer craft of cooking and the pleasure it gave people. And it was starting to be known as a means of self-expression because people weren't just cooking all the old Escoffier dishes anymore. Yeah. And all that stuff was kind of normal by the time I came around, and the French Laundry existed. Well, that's a restaurant that eventually got 3 Michelin stars, and, people were coming from Europe to stage there. But in the 80s, no people were coming from Europe to stage in the US.
It was the other way around.
But 100% the other way around, Now we have restaurants here that people want to work at from overseas. But so I had always had that feeling that I had missed this amazing time. I've always been a sucker for anything set against the backdrop of the Vietnam War, the protests, free love in California, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which my title was Chef's, Drugs, and Rock and Roll. The honest to God truth is I not really anymore, but I used to also write about tennis.
Okay.
And I was
That's why you kicked my ass when we played in Poland.
Kick your ass is strong. Were we even keeping score? We did.
I was keeping score.
You were keeping score.
Yeah, I was keeping score.
Well, I played 2-3 times a week. I don't think you had played in a couple of years.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, anyway, I was at a tennis tournament in Palm Springs, in Indian Wells. And it was a Saturday morning, and I was running an errand. And I was at a traffic light. There was no one else around. And don't ask me why, but the phrase chefs, drugs, and rock and roll popped into my head. I wasn't even thinking about the book.
Okay.
Just boom, I had this idea. And I ran back to my hotel and I Googled it, and no one had ever written even an article. I couldn't believe it. And and I was like, you know what? I think I'm going to write a book about that time. I think that'd be really cool. And there were other books on my mind. You know, so much changed in the U.S. in the 70s. Like, you know, there's a book called Live from New York, which is an oral history of Saturday Night Live. Okay. That was a very transformative moment in comedy. There's a book called Please Kill Me, which is an oral history of punk rock, 1970s. There's a book called Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, which is about the American film directors of the 70s and how old Hollywood became new Hollywood. Okay. And I started to have this thought, like no one had ever written that book about chefs and how it all became more expressive, more viable as a profession, right? And then I sold the idea to a publisher. And then the process was... and this wasn't good for my relationship with my publisher or for my marriage. You know, I did more than 200 interviews.
Wow. All over the U.S.
Yeah. I had tens of thousands of pages. I like to interview in person. Okay. I had tens of thousands of pages of transcripts. Wow. And then I had to figure out how to organize all this and, you know, what wasn't going to end up being edited out. I mean, most of my interviews are not used.
Wow. And how was at the time, because you had like, I don't know, Alice Waters, Jeremiah Tower in California and Jonathan in New York. Was there like a parallel, like, was it like one market, one movement, or you saw like, okay, this is California, this is New York. I don't know if there was any other hub or pole.
Los Angeles. Yeah. Like Bay Area and then Los Angeles. Okay. Totally separate. Okay. And then New York. And then, I mean, there were other hubs that came a little bit later, like, strangely, I think, because you wouldn't assume it, but there was kind of a hub in Texas that started in the 80s. Guys like Dean Fearing and Robert Del Grande and Stephen Piles. It wasn't really a hub, but Paul Prudhomme down in New Orleans was a big deal. Eventually Chicago, but that happened much later. You know, I think Trotter's and Rick Bayless's restaurant, first restaurant, both came in 87.
I know I don't know if it was in your book or in Jeremiah Tower's book that they talk about what happened in Florida with like Norman Van Aken and other chefs who moved to South Florida and the Keys and opened some things.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about it in there. I interviewed Norman extensively for the book. I can't remember if Jeremiah talks about it in his book.
So but maybe it was both. Yours. Yeah,
I don't know. It may be both, but I ended up. So initially, my thought was I wanted to cover everybody, you know, and. Like there was also Boston was a little bit of a hub. Okay. Also, I don't know quite why, but for some reason, even in the 80s, a real concentration of women chef restaurateurs. That never comes up.
In Boston?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Everyone says it about the Bay Area, but that was also true in Boston. Nice. You know, you had like Lydia Shire and Jody Adams and Barbara Lynch a little bit later, but there were others also. I mean, it was a real anomaly. Nice. But that's the kind of thing I just didn't have. You know, I mentioned it in passing. Some things. Okay. I wanted to have a book where you could follow characters. Characters would come and go over the course of all 300 plus pages. And at some point, I realized, you know what? I need to focus on the three main hubs. I need to do Bay Area, LA, and New York. Okay. And it's in my introduction to the book. I say a lot of people that were important are not in here, and
so much.
You know, I'm sorry about it. This is not a textbook. You know, this is the story as I felt it should be told. And I think that was the right decision. It was hard for me because people had given me their time, but it is what it is. Yeah. But I'm glad that book exists.
100%.
I'm glad that I got to, you know, not to be morbid, but it's just life. There are people interviewed for that book who have since died, and it hasn't even been 10 years since it came out. So I feel like I really got, to document something, and I'll need to get people's permissions, and I need to take out all the off the record stuff.
Okay.
I have to redact it, put black lines over it, but I'm being totally serious. But I do want to bequeath in my will. I want to add to my will. I want to leave those transcripts to somebody. I don't know if it'll be the Culinary Institute of America or the NYU Food Studies people or something. But I want to leave those interviews to somewhere because when someone tries to write another book in 50 years, they would be an amazing resource.
Nice.
The cover, just quickly, is the original team of chefs at Michael's Santa Monica. Okay. Which is still there. Sadly, I think Michael just lost his house in the fires, which I don't think that his wife quite said that explicitly, but from what she was putting on Instagram, I'm pretty sure. But the restaurant is still there and it's reopened. And, but that was a very important restaurant historically. And the four chefs on the cover are Michael McCarty, Mark Peel, who had Campanile for years. He used to be married to Nancy Silverton. Okay. And Mark did the savory side and Nancy did the pastry side at that time. And a guy named Ken Frank, who is at the restaurant La Toque in Napa, in the town of Napa, at the Westin Hotel. He's the chef there still to this day. And Jonathan Waxman. Yeah. Right. Those are the four guys on the cover. Amazing. They were all under 30. And Michael was a brilliant marketer. And that you mentioned it looked like a band. It was supposed to look like a band. Okay. Michael really that's what he wanted to convey. Nice. And we mentioned Ruth a few minutes ago. She and I share in common that is both of our favorite chef picture of all time. Oh, I just 100%. Think it's an absolute masterstroke that he did that. And are you currently working, do you have a project in the pipeline? What are you working on? I do. So last year I wrote a book called I keep saying last year. We're recording at the beginning of February. In 2023, I had a book come out called The Dish, where I took one dish at a restaurant in Chicago and I wrote about all the people whose lives and work come together on that one plate. And the next book is going to be The Opening. So I'm picking 4 restaurant projects in different parts of the U.S. From different types of restaurateurs. And I'm going to follow those projects from inception to launch. Okay. Wow. Nice. So fundraising, design, construction, hiring, training, and then opening. Nice. Yeah. Have you thought of taking that to multimedia, video, media? Sure. Yeah. Any thoughts? Well, the opening, that would make a great show. Well, The Dish, some producers optioned The Dish just based on the idea in 21, which was the year I was researching the book. Okay. And we actually shot a, what they call a sizzle reel, like a sales reel. And nothing happened with that. That's yes, of course. Years ago, it was totally unrelated. I actually did a sizzle reel for a show that was going to be called The Opening. Okay. Which was my idea, but I never was going to do a book about it. What happened was when I was finishing up The Dish, I was in the final stages of editing it and I didn't have my next project yet. Okay. And I got a call from one of the chefs that's going to be featured in The Opening. And he said, I'm opening a restaurant. And if you want to write a book about it, I'm offering you full access. Oh, nice. The guy, he's somebody I know very well. And my publisher felt like one restaurant was a little small. So that's why I ended up doing. So it's going to be like an independent veteran restaurateur, a big restaurant company, kind of like a Let Us Entertain You type company, a place that has, deep pockets, a real estate department, a marketing department, that really has it down to a science. And there's going to be a non-conventional restaurant, like maybe a food truck or someone who's only strictly pop-up.
Okay.
And then a first-time chef restaurateur.
Wow. Nice.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. It's,
that would do a great TV show or like.
It would. But, I mean, Chef's Drugs and Rock and Roll has been optioned by 4 different production companies.
Wow.
And, still doesn't exist. I still would love for it to happen.
Is there like footage, like to do a documentary based on the book?
I think there's enough. And also there's plenty of the, what's amazing about that generation. I'm convinced LSD is good for longevity because that generation of people, they're almost all still not just around. Most of them, are still running restaurants.
Wow.
You know what I mean? I mean, you look, and I'm not saying anyone in particular did acid.
Yeah.
But generationally, it was very common.
Of course.
But, Alice Waters is still running Chez Panisse. And Jonathan, still has Barbudo and some other restaurants in different places. And Nancy Silverton is still opening new restaurants and writing books.
She's opening a diner now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. That energy.
So, there's plenty of people who, some of them, like whenever I see Nancy, she's like, when's the movie coming? But some of them are really geeked for it. I think all of them would give time to be interviewed.
100%.
And I think there's enough footage and photography and also footage of the time.
Yeah.
Because the time was so influential in that happening.
Okay.
So yes, I would love for it to happen. I don't spend a lot of time pushing that rock up the hill. But I tried very hard with Chef's Drugs. So I can't say anything else, but somebody's newly interested in it. We'll see if that goes anywhere. The dish, if the right people come into my orbit, I'll mention it or if somebody approaches me, but I got a lot to do and all the stuff I'm doing will happen. That's the thing about, as I said, I spent 4 years working for a film producer.
Wow.
And I remember I went to visit him once. I had not been working for him for about a year. And we used to have a little like development slate. And it was all these things we had that we were developing and or trying to sell and to a studio. And it was a list of in the neighborhood of 40 things. And it was everything from a book that we liked to an article that was interesting to an idea one of us had. And a year after I was working there, I went to pay him a visit, and the woman who had taken my job when I left, I said, hey, let me see the development slate. And it was all the same things. Wow. Because it's very rare to get something to the finish line and get a green light, we recorded an interview for my show today. It's going to air. We're doing this. You're going to air it.
Exactly.
I sell a book to a publisher. It's going to be published.
Exactly.
There's none of this blood, sweat, and tears that come to nothing.
100%.
I'm sure there are horror stories, but I haven't, knock on wood, I haven't had them, so yeah.
Great. And switching gears a little bit and now maybe to the last part of the show.
Sure.
You go out a lot to restaurants and check out what's new. And I'm sure you have like your favorite classics and everything. What excites you these days in New York or outside of New York in terms of like new restaurants or chefs who are doing great things or places that you feel it clicks all the boxes? Sure.
Well, I should say, first of all, I usually travel a lot more than I have in the last year or two. I'll be traveling for this book, but I haven't done much travel yet. For it. So a lot of what I have to say is probably New York based. I love Claude. I absolutely love that restaurant. It's either 9th or 10th Street.
Okay.
A little bit east of Broadway in the Village. I just think it's such a smart, cool,
nice,
but genuinely warm restaurant. There's no attitude in it. I'm a big fan of the Unapologetic Foods guys.
Oh, they're amazing.
Chef Chintan Pandya and his restaurateur partner, Ronnie Mazumdar. They have restaurants like Dhamaka and Sema.
Little ad here. They're doing the launches for Lengua Conference.
Oh, they're going to be there?
Yes.
Oh, cool.
They did a panel last year. It's on video. It's a beautiful panel discussion about the future of hospitality. About their growth. Last year was growth. And they fell in love with the space and we really bonded. So I invited them. They're going to be serving lunch both days at the conference.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, the whole idea, what they do to me, if I can be a little more general, for me, so the company is called Unapologetic Foods. And what they mean by that is they are not doing the handful of Indian dishes that most Americans know.
Exactly.
It's very often regional. They're different restaurants. They pick a region and they cook basically just outstanding versions of what you would eat if you live there.
Exactly.
Right? And when they say unapologetic, they mean we're not apologizing for being who we are. This is who we are. And Chintan has a real serious fine dining background, like real serious.
Really?
Yeah, he's very classically trained and worked in some very fancy hotels and stuff. But the food you get at these restaurants is very, I don't want it to sound overly casual because it's not, but it is very much kind of home style regional food. And to me, more generally in terms of what's going on around the United States, and I have this conversation with young chefs. I just had it yesterday with a chef. I think one of the most important and welcome things for me in American dining is, for the longest time, if somebody wanted to cook the food of their culture or another culture, they had to kind of Frenchify it. Like you look at a guy like Floyd Cardoz, who sadly passed away in the early days of COVID. He died from COVID in 2020. Floyd was the chef at Tabla in New York and very important chef in terms of Indian food in the United States. But Floyd, and I'm not putting him down, this was the norm. It was Indian flavors and kind of a traditional French or more broadly European package, right? But I feel like now you can get the same level of acclaim, the same number of stars from the Times or from Michelin or whoever, cooking food, like the authentic food. I shouldn't say authentic. That word's not that word's on the outs right now. The traditional food of your culture or of a culture, and you don't have to pretty it up. Exactly. You don't have to go nuts with technique and showmanship. Yeah. And that, I think the unapologetic restaurants are, I think they exemplify that. I don't think they were first. Yeah. But I think that's been a very exciting change. And I think, for people like myself and like you who are interested in the world and other cultures, and it's a cliche to say this at this point, but it's true. Food is such a window into everything about a culture.
100%.
Everything from economics to history to, just all of it. It all food reflects all of it. Yeah. And to be able to eat these dishes in a pure form, to me, is really cool. And so I think those guys exemplify that. And there's a restaurant, a Sofra, Iranian restaurant in Brooklyn. I mean, that place is awesome. It's hard to get a table there. Okay. That's fairly traditional food.
Yeah. What happened to me in a recent trip to New York, everybody was recommended me a Bangkok Supper Club.
I love that restaurant.
Yeah. But I cannot say I had a bad meal. The food was delicious, but I went in expecting the dhamaka of Thai food. And it was a nice Thai restaurant, but very they have ribeye in the menu or things like that.
Yes. And a very sophisticated cocktail program.
Yeah. So I like the food.
Right.
But I was going for that unapologetic Thai.
You know what's funny? I have to say, I just went to a collaboration dinner that they did, the Bangkok Supper Club people did with a restaurant that's like a 15-minute walk from here called Theodora. And it was fantastic. But I kind of feel like the American diner, again, not to speak ill of my country, although we are in 2025, you can edit that out if you want. I don't care. You know, I feel like the American dining public can only kind of handle like one new cuisine at a time.
Yes.
I feel like cuisines kind of have their moment and then they kind of melt into the backdrop and they become part of what we're used to. And then, for example, well, Indian right now is kind of having a moment. You know, we had the whole Middle Eastern / Israeli thing for a while. That was happening.
Yeah. Before that, Korean,
modern,
Filipino.
yeah. And they. But I feel like I don't know if it's because the media can only handle one thing at a time, or if it's the public, or, you know, I mentioned this thing before about gatekeepers being a demarcation line. I feel like in the world of food, in America, in the United States, I feel like a real demarcation line of something finally really being respected by the diners here is when they can start to pull apart in their mind the different regions.
Exactly.
Right? You know, you go back 40 years and Italian food in New York was Northern and Southern. That was it, right?
Yeah.
Now I'm going to eat Tuscan. I'm going to eat Sicilian. Right? People, Emilia Romagna.
Yeah.
People know what these things mean. You know, Mexico is kind of having
100%
a moment like that.
Driven or
people are having a sense of different you know, areas of the country. Or you look at you know, Rico and Diego in San Antonio who have Michelin, where they do a bunch of research, and then I don't know if they change it every 2 months or what, but whenever they change the menu, it's to explore a different part of Mexico. Yeah. Right. And I feel like the unapologetic guys are trying to make that happen for Indian food. And as you said, Korean became, you know, now people know all these different dishes. And,
yes.
But I feel like for whatever reason, generally speaking, we can only kind of handle one. It's like fashion, you know, it's like, what are people wearing this year? It's like, what are people eating this year?
There's always one, and same for ingredients, no?
Yeah.
But I write, every year I write for Glutonomy, like the food trends for next year. And I always include a regional cuisine. And this year I mentioned West African.
100%. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, I saw the late Mimi Sheridan, who had once been the New York Times restaurant critic, saying, West African's going to happen. Yeah. Right? I mean,
in London happened probably a year before with like Ikoyi and Akoko, but you started seeing it in the US now.
Well, but again, I not to overgeneralize, I think it's probably, you know, Americans, you know, you hear West African, you're like, what is that? I don't know what that is. Right. But I think if you're eating other foods, like if you're eating Indian food with all its spices, which are so important, you're kind of primed for West African food. Exactly. Right? I'm not saying it's the same. Yeah. But it's, you know, it's sort of like now you're ready. Yeah. You won't be lost. Yeah. You won't be lost.
From the Latin cuisine. So
yeah. You know, but it's, I mean, Nadal, I'm old enough to remember when sushi first, you know, I remember I was in college in New York. And this guy, I don't even remember his real name. We called him Scrub. I don't even know why. But this guy Scrub was walking up Broadway and he had a little takeout container and he had chopsticks and he was eating sushi walking up the street. And I said, what are you eating? And he goes, sushi. I'm like, what's that? Raw fish. And I was like, you know, excuse my ignorance. I was 17. I had just come here from Miami when Miami had no food culture. And I was a country bumpkin, you know, I was very unsophisticated. Now sushi is probably my favorite thing. Nice. But I remember when that was like a threshold. Wow. You know, I mean, it's crazy, but, we've come a long way. Yeah. And I think we have a shorter distance to go than the distance we've come.
100%.
And I think, and not just in the big cities anymore.
Yeah. Connected to what we were talking before, like distances are shorter now. The world is smaller. the word gets out much faster with social media and connectivity. So,
but also there's so many, so many chefs who have left New York, San Francisco, Chicago, LA, and gone back home. Yeah. To where they came from, and brought their training and their food sophistication, and they're training cooks locally. And it really is transmitting, and now we have people's interest is being piqued by shows. I mean, again, this is a whole other new thing. Yeah. Shows like Chef's Table. That's new. There was nothing like that 20 years ago.
Oh, no way.
I mean, Top Chef had happened, but that's not where you get serious. I love Top Chef, but that's not where you become a serious person about food or really learn about food. But Chef's Table and its like are like that. You could see a chef and talking about their culture and talking about what they've done with it. And you might think, gosh, I want to go eat that food.
100%. And that's what also Tony did with all his shows. Like some were more politicals than others, but at the end with Parts Unknown, I think, he would explore, like he would give same weight to like political issues and social issues than food. And it was like it all like connected at the end of the day, no?
Very much so. But I also think this, again, I just think it spoke to his kind of moral compass. Like, yes, there was stuff that was political, but I almost think it was just moral. Like, he didn't really, you're going to talk about poverty somewhere and the system that enables it to be perpetuated. I know that there are people who would call that political. I do not call that political. I think that's a moral problem. Yeah. And I think that's how if I can say this, I think that's how he saw it.
100%. Yeah.
Anyway. So Tony gets the last word.
Exactly.
That's okay.
Exactly. No, thanks a lot,
thank you,
Andrew, for not only being a guest, but to opening your house, your home in Brooklyn for us to do this show. And I don't know if you have like some closing remarks or a message you want to leave.
Well, since we were just talking about this, I would say if you're out there and you're not this kind of person naturally, you probably are if you're listening to Nadal's podcast, but go try something you've never had before. Go try food you've never had before.
Nice.
It's so easy to do. And I think the thrill of discovery is like, it's so great. It makes you a student for an hour and your senses will be activated. And, probably if you're doing that, you'll be in a setting that's a little different from another restaurant you've been to. But the only other thing I want to say is I'm glad you're on the air. I'm glad you're part of this podcasting community now. And I'm glad we got to know each other a little better today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Thank you for listening. We're One of Each. We are on every platform. You can see us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, leave us your comments, your likes, subscribe. Thanks for supporting this. I mean, everybody listening to this is the reason why we want to share these stories. And again, Andrew, thanks for your time and thanks for coming to One of Each.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye.